Hi everyone, this is just a quick video helping any learner studying any aspect of English, functional skills or ESOL, just to help you understand how to write to complain and understand how to actually structure your writing to make it effective. This can be something that's really difficult and that a lot of people struggle with because when we are writing to complain, a lot of the times the emotions can get in the way and that can kind of affect the message that we're trying to convey. So let's take a look now of how to put a response together. The first thing we need to think about is when you're writing to a complaint, what is the purpose and what kind of things should you avoid? So first of all, what is the purpose? If you're asked to complain about a certain thing, or if in your day-to-day life you find there's something that you need to complain about, then it's generally to express your anger or your annoyance about a service or a company. It might also be to inform others of your grievances, or to change or alter something that is wrong. So if you think about this bottom bullet point here, a really important thing to think about is that it's not just about expressing your anger, it's also to think there's a point behind it, right? There's a purpose driving our words and our argument to actually say that there is something wrong here and it desperately needs to change. Some of the things you should avoid. Don't be aggressive. When we're aggressive, the first thing that people think is that, well, this person is not communicating in an effective or dignified manner, and therefore I'm not really going to listen to them or take on board what they have to say. Don't use language that might be deemed inappropriate or offensive. So what we mean by that is try to avoid any words that might trigger certain emotions from your audience. Don't think about using words like idiot or stupid because those have some really negative connotations that can affect the interpretation of your message. And also don't swear. A lot of the times when we're trying to get our message across, swearing just makes it seem a little bit less professional, makes it seem very, very informal. We don't really want that to kind of affect the way our message is coming across because people are just not going to take it seriously. Only showing one side of the argument, this is also something that's very important to try and avoid. If you just say, this is my point of view and you're wrong and this needs to change, then it kind of makes them seem like you don't understand the broader issue at play. So acknowledge this person might have a lot of things going on. They might have several things that are demanding their attention at one time. So if you don't acknowledge that, if you don't appreciate that there's another side to the argument or the situation, then you're really limiting the impact of your words. One of the most important things to help structure your writing are discourse markers. So what are discourse markers? So discourse markers are words and phrases that are used in speaking and writing to signpost the discourse. Now what we really mean by that, when we say signpost the discourse, we mean it helps structure our actual speaking or our writing. So it can be used both in actual written speech or when you actually come to do your writing assessment as well. Discourse markers do this by showing turns, joining ideas together, showing attitude and generally controlling communication. So it's kind of the most important aspect of your conversation. Here are some examples. So you have ones that are talking about specifically about time. So you have things like firstly, secondly, thirdly, and finally. You have ones that contradict the way that the first sentence or the first idea is going. So things like saying however, although, whereas. So you might say, I really enjoy doing maths. However, I'm much stronger at doing English. So you see there how that discourse marker is used to take it in a different direction. And finally, you have things like, for example, such as, or in other words. Now there are many different discourse markers and you might find that you use them in everyday conversation without really realizing it, but it's important to understand that they're the ones that kind of link and help carry our communication. Another important technique to use in your writing is hyperbole. This is also called exaggeration, but essentially you can use it like this. So if you think first of all of quite a negative one, I'm going to use the idea about describing really noisy and unpleasant neighbours that you might live with. So let's imagine we're complaining about them. So the example is, the constant noise coming from my neighbour is worse than being at a rave in Ibiza. The noise will simply cause the whole street to go crazy with annoyance. So if you look there, the bit that's really been over exaggerated here is that the noise that the neighbours are making is worse than being in a rave, so a massive party in Ibiza. Obviously it's not going to be as loud as that, but we're using that exaggeration to try and emphasise how annoying and how disruptive this family is being to the rest of the street. We're also using some appropriate language here and also punctuation as well. The exclamation mark here at the end of Ibiza helps to really enforce the point as well. You can use it in a more positive sense, and this is a good thing to use in your writing as well, to show that you are not just simply going to be very negative in your writing. You can say some positives and some negatives, even if you are writing to complain. So let's have a look at my example now. My other neighbours, however, are the best people in the world. They are kind and considerate, and it's not fair for them or myself to have to put up with such noise on our street. Now, if you think back to what we looked at a moment ago as well, we were looking at our discourse markers, and you can see that we actually have used a discourse marker there in the word however as well, to show that we're going to contradict what we said in that first example with a much angrier idea. We're using hyperbole the same way here, but the only way we're using it is we're using it in a much more positive way by saying they're the best people in the world. Clearly they're not going to be the best people in the world, right? You don't know everyone in the world, so it's very unlikely that they are. So we're over-exaggerating. We're saying these people are absolutely fantastic, and that helps show the contrast between the really annoying and horrible neighbours who are keeping the whole street up at night. Look at the exam question below and start planning your response. So first thing to think of is this. You have new neighbours and they're causing the following problems: constant noise, rubbish everywhere, parties at night, and those kind of things. Okay, so last week you tried to talk to them about the problems, but they would not listen. Okay, so what do you do in that scenario? You decide to complain to the council. Okay, now this is an important thing to actually do, not just because it's part of your actual course. It's also very important because you need to know how to communicate effectively to organisations and positions within government and things like that, because sometimes you really don't know who to turn to. So being able to know who to speak to and how to actually structure your writing appropriately to get your message across is going to be very important just in the broader sense of life as well. These are the things we need to consider then. So the writing task is this: write a complaint about your neighbours on the council web forum. In your complaint, you should describe the problems with your new neighbours, explain the effects of these problems in your life, and finally, you should aim to write about 150 to 200 words. Now, this is actually a typical example of the kind of thing you'd be expected to do for functional skills level 1. You can see there that it says 150 to 200 words, and that's typically the kind of amount that you're going to be expected to write for this level. For other questions, you might have to go up to 250, but it's really not that much of a stretch from that one. Now, these bullet points have been here to actually tell you what you need to focus on in your writing. So we have some important things here on the left hand side. You'll be expected to talk about this constant noise, rubbish everywhere, and parties at night. So that actually gives us a lot of scope to talk about there. And you also have even more guidance in the writing task as well. So it's talking about describing the problems that we're having, explain the effects of these problems in your life. So if they're talking about the effects, they mean things like, obviously all of us have to go to work, some of us will have children and families and things like that, and then that's going to impact our family in a broader sense as well. So these are the kind of things that they'd expect you to be focusing on in your writing. What we're going to do now is we're going to use an example on the next slide just to help you get started. So if you do want to use it, that's absolutely fantastic, but don't feel like you have to do it. You can always come up with your own one. This is just a quick one just to show you a typical example of how you might want to start it. Now we're going to have a look at a simple example answer. Once we've gone through it, I'd like to think about the stretch and challenge tasks that we can see there in the right hand side. So it says then, what on earth does the council pay you for? I have been complaining and complaining about the bloody neighbours in our street for at least a month. Has anything been done about it? No. I can't stand hearing about them blaring their stupid music all night. It is driving me up the wall. You need to sort them out quick before I do. So this is actually a very typical kind of complaint that you might see someone given to the council. And what I'd like to think about with this example is, are there any positives or negative aspects about this response? Would it appropriately get the message across, or is there some elements that we need to change or adapt to make our writing more effective? Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So here we have the same example that we just looked at, and now we're going to look through some of the positive aspects and some of the negative aspects as well, and see what needs to be changed and what actually works well in this piece of writing. So the first thing I'd like to bring to your attention is right there on the first line. What on earth do the council pay you for? You can see here that this is quite an aggressive tone, and this isn't really going to be the most effective thing to use in your writing. However, at the end of it, it is used in a rhetorical question, which would get you some marks in the exam. Another technique that they've used here is repetition. I've been complaining and complaining about the bloody neighbours in our street for at least a month. So it's repeated the word complaining, which is an effective De Forest technique and a good one to use in all forms of writing as well. Unfortunately, now that it's actually referring to the neighbours, we can feel the annoyance and the anger that is kind of spilling across into the writing. And as we thought about in the things you shouldn't include in your writing, you shouldn't be overly angry or aggressive in your writing. And when you say bloody neighbours, that has some really negative connotations, and it makes it sound like you're writing this letter out of anger and out of rage rather than out of anything based on logic or anything like that. Next one, you can see here we have a rhetorical question. One's already been used at the start of the passage, which is fine, but once you've used one or two, you maybe should think about using a different technique to help improve your response. Has anything been done about it? And the person has gone ahead and answered it themselves, and we can feel the anger that kind of comes across this as well. So that's what I'd like to think about as we go through this. Is this coming across too angry? Do they need to dial it back a bit, or do you think it's appropriate? From a teacher's point of view, a lot of the things in here are coming across as too overly aggressive or negative. So I can't stand hearing them blaring their stupid music all night. And think about that word stupid, all the really negative connotations behind that. It's very demoralizing. It's a very kind of disrespectful word to use. So you've got to be careful about how that's going to affect the tone of your writing. Next one, this is an example of a hyperbole or exaggeration, a very old-fashioned kind of typical British expression here. It is driving me up the wall. I don't literally mean that it's been driven up the wall. We're trying to exaggerate here. We're using a hyperbole to say that it's driving the person mad. Yeah, they're really not happy with what they're doing. Now the final one. Now this is a bit problematic, the last kind of sentence that we have here. You need to sort them out quick before I do. Now, you think about what is implied behind those words. The person is saying that I'm so angry, I'm so annoyed by the things that are happening, that the fact that nothing has been changed, that I'm about to go and take action into my own hands. Now, this doesn't sound very positive. It sounds borderline threatening, like there might be some action of violence, and that's something we should definitely try to avoid as well. So you can see there from the words that are in green, you've got things like repetition, rhetorical question, the hyperbole. Some of those things are working well, but overall we've got quite a few negative adjectives and negative tone, and at the end there, threatening behaviour, which is going to make the reader just feel like, this person isn't here to communicate their ideas effectively, they're just here to have a rant and have a moan, and that's the overall tone that we're going to get from this writing, unfortunately. Now we're going to take a look at the second attempt in learning. So what's happened from that first attempt? The learner has gone back, they've had some feedback from their teacher, and now they've come back to actually rewrite their letter of complaint, and they're trying to think about how to improve it to get a more appropriate message across. So it says then, to whom it may concern, I'm writing to complain about the horrendous and horrible actions of my neighbour. On numerous occasions they have played loud music, thrown their litter in the street with no regard for others, and held parties that go on until the early hours of the morning. I'm sure you understand how annoying this is, right? After putting up with this terrible torture for 3 weeks, I have simply had enough. There is nothing on this earth that is worse than my neighbours. 95% of the street has complained about them, but still nothing has been resolved. Please listen to us. We all need this to end now. So if you think about that response, it's still talking about the same issues that we mentioned earlier, but it's coming across in a much more structured and well organised way. If you don't know who it is that you're actually speaking to, saying to whom it may concern is actually an appropriate way to start it, because you don't specifically know who's going to be reading it. Now we're going to go ahead and have a look to see where are the positive examples and where are the negative examples of this response. And straight away, you should be able to see that they're having a much more appropriate tone for this writing, and they're starting to use a few deforest techniques, some of them really appropriate persuasive techniques that we can use to help structure our writing. So the first one here is the word horrendous and horrible actions there. So you've got alliteration. They've also used a semicolon here, a colon I should say, excuse me. So on numerous occasions they have played loud music, thrown the litter in the street. So it's starting to list the things that are actually bothering them or causing them distress. They've also used parentheses, also known as brackets, to give us extra information. So remember, you're not just getting marked on the things you're writing about, but also how you're presenting that information and whether you're using the appropriate punctuation, grammatical devices, all those other things as well. I'm sure you understand how annoying this is, right? So we've got a lovely rhetorical question here, and it's kind of making a connection with the person you're talking to, right? I'm sure you understand, right? We've all been there. We've all had nights where we can't sleep, or we're having issues because people are being too loud outside, and they're making that human connection. Remember, this person is a human just like you, and many of the things that you are complaining about, they probably would have experienced themselves at some point as well. After putting up with this terrible torture, which is a lovely example here of alliteration, terrible torture. So you can see there already that rather than repeating the same techniques over and over again, the candidate is trying to actually use a variety of them and show us that they know how to use different techniques. They've also used the semicolon here. It's kind of similar to a colon, but we use this when we're joining two ideas together that are closely linked. So after putting up with this terrible torture for 3 weeks, I have simply had enough. A lot of people ask me, how do I use a semicolon effectively? And a simple thing to pay attention to is the fact that the first line needs to make sense by itself, so you could put a full stop there. After putting up with this terrible torture for 3 weeks, I have simply had enough. These two ideas are linked together, so therefore we can use a semicolon. There is nothing on this earth that is worse than my neighbours. So if you've watched any of our previous videos, we speak quite heavily about superlatives, and worse is a superlative. That is telling us that that is the highest extent of something, right? We can't get anything that is any worse than this type of neighbour, right? They're the absolute pinnacle of the worst people around. We also have a statistic here where we say 95% of the street has complained about them, but still nothing has been resolved. And you've got quite a nice pleasant tone at the end there, so they're not letting anger get to us, but they say, please listen to us, we all need this to end now. And the fact that we've used words like we and all shows that collectively everyone else in the street is really fed up of these neighbours as well. If we look at the mark scheme, then you could be able to read through it and to understand how your marks are available. So you get marked on two big components within this question. It's 12 marks for the composition, which is really how you're putting it together. And you can see there that there's a number of different things that you need to do, ranging from using your sentences with a range of accuracy, using simple vocabulary, so that means not the best words in the world, communicate your ideas clearly and with some accuracy as well. This is still at the low level, because if you can see there for composition you get 12 marks. So just for doing those you get marks from 1 to 4. Now when we look at the other end of the mark scheme, you can see that there are many more marks available, but you need to make sure that you're using specific skills. So just to get 5 out of 8, you need to make sure that you communicate your information, your ideas and your opinions reasonably clearly, using details appropriate for the purpose, audience and to an appropriate length. Use appropriate format and structure for the audience and purpose with the use of paragraphs. So essentially this is something that a lot of people actually neglect, is making sure that they're writing in paragraphs. So just make sure that you're taking your time with it, especially if you're doing it based on this video. Feel free to take your time. There's no reason to rush through it at the moment or do it, against a specific time constraint. Just take your time and see how it goes. Use a range of sentences, including complex sentences with reasonable accuracy. So generally with your writing, you don't want to have the same length of sentences throughout. It's going to make it sound very boring, very dull. So you want to make sure that you're trying to vary it as you go along as well. Use a range of vocabulary appropriate to the task. So saying things like it's torturous, it's horrendous, and things like that really helps to get our views across and to make sure that it really communicates how angry you're feeling about this topic. There's not really a massive jump between the 5 to 8 and the 9 to 12. It's just doing things a little bit better, a little bit more effectively. For example, a lot of them are repeating similar skills that you're using in the last one for 5 to 8. So rather than using a range of vocabulary, you now have to use a wide range of vocabulary. So it just means, can you step these skills up? Can you improve on them and get up to the higher level? If you need any additional support or help, then new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, you can leave us a comment below, like or subscribe, or you can check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more things on English uploaded every single week. I hope that's okay, guys, and if you need any help, please feel free to drop us a comment in the section below. Thanks, guys. Bye.